Hey, welcome to the ReThink podcast. And man, we've got a special opportunity for people today. Special guest. Can't believe that we're going to be able to kick off the Revelation series with somebody who knows what they're talking about besides us. And
There's
so,
one of.
I was
one
going to
of-
say,
one
there's
of
only
five.
one person that probably knows what they're talking about on this podcast.
yeah, and it ain't us. It ain't the people you're seeing on video. It's the guy we've got calling in on the phone. But we're excited. I don't know what episode this is.
I have no
666? Is that about how many we've done? Oh, well, no, it's who knows how many it is, but it's number one of
I
Revelation,
think it's
and it's
120, 144.
It's exciting. It's exciting for us to be able to share. We went in March to Turkey as a part of our preparation for this series. Went to the 7 sites for the 7 churches that are mentioned in chapters 2 and 3 of Revelation, and shot some video and prepared some content. And we're just trying to really help people because we understand in our audience, even from I'm sure it's been reinforced to you guys as we have prepared and shared that we're going to talk about Revelation. There's some people that are super excited, too much so, and there are people that are scared to death that we're going to go wacky.
I've
And
talked to
so,
both.
Yeah,
Yep.
there's some of both, and we just want people to know it's in the Bible. It's important. It's valuable.
Yeah, there's a.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
we wanted to get some help. And so we have Shane Woods with us from Ozark Christian College. And I shared with my wife today as we were getting ready. And I was told I'm going to come in. I'm going to interview a guy that we've been watching on Right Now Media. She's like, wow, that's impressive. So, Shane, Matt tells me that.
How's it going?
Yeah, it's good. Matt tells me that he knows you. Is that true?
It is true. It is true. We have the same home church back in the day at Mid Rivers. Yep, absolutely.
Nice. Yep. Yeah, I was just reflecting on the things that, just growing up, watching and listening to you. You were teaching Revelation when I was in high school, I think, is when I first remember that
Yep.
class. So.
Wow.
That's whenever they were first crazy enough to let me be in a classroom. So it was fun.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Why don't you give us a little bit of your backstory so people kind of know who we're talking to?
Yeah, actually I've grown up in the church my whole life, and I went to Ozark Christian College in 2000 to 2004, and then went on and did my master's at Lincoln Christian University, and then finished my PhD at the University of Edinburgh in 2014. And I did my master's stuff and my dissertation on the Book of Revelation. So I've been knee deep in this for quite some time. But now I'm here at teaching at Ozark and one of the academic deans here, and I have a beautiful family of 4 children and a wonderful wife, and yeah, just living here in Joplin, Missouri.
So why Revelation? What was the draw for you?
I think that's a really important question to ask because there's sometimes usually when people say why Revelation when they're asking me, it's usually done with kind of this look like, why are you crazy? Truth.
That's the look he has
and
on his face.
I get it.
We'll pop a picture of you up right now. Yeah.
Well, he said that you're really, really, really smart, right? That was Matt's description of you.
All
And I
of
think
it, like all
a
of
guy
your
pursuing
brothers
Revelation.
are too.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I told Jeff and the guys. I said, you get with these 3 guys, you're in the deep end of the pool immediately.
And you've chose to make that a focus
Which
of
I love.
Revelation.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I did. For me, it was actually what drove me to it was growing up in the church my whole life. I never heard a sermon on the Book of Revelation. Like we didn't talk about it from the pulpit. We didn't talk about it in classrooms. And so I remember being scared of the book. I remember driving. I grew up in the St. Louis area, so I remember driving home, as a junior, senior in high school, and seeing a blood red moon, and basically swerving off of the road because I thought, the world's going to end. And my first encounter with Revelation was that night, and I read it front to back for like 2 hours at like 3 a.m. I was scared out of my mind, and so whenever I came to Ozark, my thought was, there's got to be a reason why God put this in the Bible. And it has to be more than just to scare me. And so I dove into it my second semester here at Ozark, and then it just never let me go. It's been one of those books that has been so deeply transforming that it challenges me to be like Jesus in a way that I just am borderline addicted to. It just, I mean, we'll talk about this later, but I'm sure, but it's not about the prediction for me. I believe in the book of Revelation, the target is the reader, that it's trying to transform you. And for me, it's been one of the most deeply transformative books that I've ever encountered. And so I just decided, why not just dedicate my life to studying it and giving it back to the church.
So you said something there that I want to just insert another question in on. You said it's not there to scare you. Why do you think it is in the Bible? Why did God give us this message?
Yeah, for quite a few different reasons, but one of which it gives us vivid depictions of Jesus in the after the resurrection. You know, it's kind of like the Gospels are vivid pictures of Jesus while he is being born and while he's alive, and we get to kind of see his ascension-ish. You know, Gospel of Matthew is probably one of the closer. You know, Luke is where we get kind of the ascension, but post the ascension, we don't have a lot of vivid pictures of Jesus. But Revelation gives us tons, and it challenges us. It unveils. I think we're at the end of the first century. There's a lot happening in the Roman world. There's a lot happening in the lives of these Christians, and God needed to send a message so they could have a more vivid understanding of who Jesus is and what he's calling us to be today.
So, okay, so you said for you it was very transformative, and like you said with the picture. So how do you keep that Christ-centered, gospel-centered theme going through that and not get distracted by the imagery?
Yeah, that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's one of the things I tell my students all the time. It's like, listen, don't get so focused on one tree that you miss the forest. Mm-hmm. It's like Revelation. It's okay to zoom in on a detail, but if we stop at that detail, that's whenever we usually get off track. And so what I do is I try to remind myself of the first 5 words of the book and say it to myself over and over and over, that this is the revelation of Jesus Christ. Like it's telling us what the book's about at the first 5 words. And so usually whenever I get so overwhelmed by a detail, I usually just flip back to Revelation 1:1, read those first 5 words, and remind myself of what it is that John said that this was about.
That is I love that idea.
Yeah, that's really good.
Simple.
Yeah. So Shane, over the course of your time diving into Revelation, teaching it now, what are some tools, some practical applications that you've used to kind of dive into this and see what Revelation is actually pointing to? What are some of those things that you've used?
No, that's great. First of all, I will say your guys' trip back in March was very wise. That was one of the things I did back in 2000. Yeah. I'll let you guys haggle that out. But, no, it is wise because, and I did that back in 2007 because it brings it to life in a different way. One of the number one tools that I talk about in the right now media videos and that I hammered into my students' heads here at Ozark is context. Context matters, and one of the key aspects of context for me is we need to remember that the book of Revelation was written to a real group of people at a real time going through real issues. And I love the fact that we have the New Testament, but we need to remember that the New Testament, we're overhearing conversations. Like when Paul is writing the book of Romans, he didn't sit down and be like, Romans chapter 1, verse 1, the book that will confound theologians for the next 2,000. No, he's writing to a group of people in the city of Rome that are going through issues, and he's reaching out to them, and by God's grace, we get to overhear his conversation with them, well, at least one side of that conversation. Mm-hmm. And Revelation is no different. Like these are a real group of people that, whenever they drank their water, Church of Laodicea, they would have to convulsively vomit because the water was lukewarm by the time it made it to their city. Like, I mean, this is, the Church of Sardis, which has, this amazing like citadel almost at the very top of the hill that it was people believed was impenetrable, and yet they had fallen asleep during a battlefield and were taken 3 separate times. Like, these are real people, and they're living at the time at the end of the 1st century. In Rome, the intensity of the physical persecution is starting to ramp up, and Christians are being put into very precarious situations where either they compromise their commitment to Jesus, or they get kicked out of their trade guild and can't make money anymore, or they actually can get killed. We see this with Pergamum and Antipas. Or they're exiled to an island like John is on the island of Patmos. And so for me, the number one tool for reading the book of Revelation is remembering these are a real group of people at a real time going through real things, and we get to overhear how their pastor ministers to them. And that, when you have that perspective, it starts to change even the questions that you're asking. A lot of the times we're obsessed with the question of when is the world going to end? And we come to the book of Revelation and we demand revelation to answer that question. But a lot of the people, whenever you have loved ones that are being taken away and killed, you're not really thinking so much about what the end of the world is. You're thinking questions like this: God, are you still there? God, do you care what's happening to us? Are you really victorious? Did you really establish a kingdom like you said? Because it looks like Rome is winning and they're doing a good job. Mm-hmm. So understanding their situation is essential because it actually transforms the questions that make sense when we ask it to the text.
Shane, just to piggyback off that, and this will kind of transition into our one of the next questions for you, but one thing that I see people continuously getting caught up in is the imagery of Revelation. I mean, it's everywhere. Can you speak to the reason why John is using this imagery? Because we try to, and this will get into some literal or figurative interpretations, but we really get caught up in that imagery. But just speak for a minute about why John is using that type of language.
I think Shane too. Can I put an extra part with that?
No, you can't.
No, he just about said that was
just
a great
about
question.
answered
your
now, come on.
Let's put mine.
Doesn't need any
Let's
more.
bring some confusion. Go ahead.
There's an issue I need clarified before we move forward.
Well, that's why we're all
Go
here.
ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah,
You're the boss,
me.
man.
So you talk about context and audience and reading somebody else's mail. We talk about that with the letters, the epistles, and we talk here a lot about genre, understanding genre. What's epistles and apocalyptic type literature? They're the same, but they're different. Mm-hmm. Right? Or am I wrong on that? So that's the same question you're asking, but I think for that verbiage, a little bit of clarification too there, why like apocalyptic literatures, it's different.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, sorry. Now go ahead, Shane.
Yeah. Let me give an answer, and if I've missed one of the components, by all means, tell me to do it.
Oh, we will.
We will. Yeah.
Yes, apocalyptic literature does have different characteristics of it. In the same way that country music has certain characteristics of it that if you have those elements, you're expecting a certain genre of music. However, we do know that sometimes it can be hard to discern which genre a song is a part of. For a long time there was this big debate with Taylor Swift. Is she really country or is she pop? Because there's elements of it that were blurring into it. And apocalyptic does have key characteristics to it, like angelic beings helping guide the narrative, otherworldly beings, or apocalyptic literature loves imagery. It uses imagery, especially grabbing a hold of Jewish imagery from Old Testament text, which the book of Revelation, 404 verses, but it has over 516 allusions to the Old Testament. So we'll come back to that point in a minute. However, the apocalyptic text of Revelation is still an epistle. It is still written as a letter to 7 churches, which is why Revelation 1:3 blesses the one who reads the words of this prophecy out loud. And the reason why that's important is because that tells us something about the churches. in the ancient world, the illiteracy rate was, estimates are anywhere from 70 to 85% of the people couldn't read or write. And so this letter is being sent to churches, and somebody would be designated in the church to read it out loud. And that's why also the second half of verse 3, it says, and blessed are those who hear it. Because you have somebody reading it, you have somebody hearing it, and then it puts this key element in. And blessed are those who hear it and obey what is written in it. So you have this apocalyptic text, but it is still like an epistle being read out loud in the churches and even circulating with the 7 churches themselves. So each of the 7 churches would have had, that's one of the things I think is always funny about chapters 2 and 3. The 7 churches were overhearing aspects of the mail to their brothers and sisters just down the road. So whenever they're in Laodicea and they're in, and they're reading Ephesus, Laodicea is going, "Oh man, they totally got them in Ephesus." And then of course it comes to Laodicea and they get slammed over the head. But to answer the question about the imagery, John wrote this to them like this because it would have been familiar to them. That's one of the things I always try to make sure I emphasize. Yes, the book of Revelation to us is weird. It is crazy. It is overwhelming. It seems so much unlike every other book of the New Testament. But this would not have been unfamiliar to them. There were other apocalyptic texts that were written around this time. We even have the book of Daniel. The last half of the book of Daniel, chapter 7 through around 11, is apocalyptic. It is, there's beasts coming out of the sea in Daniel chapter 7. There's 4 of them. And then there's this angel that helps interpret the text. And they were familiar with the images. And then whenever you come back to the fact that 516 at least allusions to the Old Testament, their Bible at the time they were receiving this letter was not Pauline letters. That would come a little bit later. Right. Their Bible was the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the imagery of Revelation is not that hard to figure out if you just know the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. Like the 2 witnesses in Revelation 11, it's not that mysterious if you've read Zechariah 4 recently. Because Zechariah 4 tells us that the olive branch and that it stands for the anointed ones, the king and the priest. The problem is a lot of the times in the 21st century, we don't know our Old Testament very well, and we come to the images of Revelation, and instead of looking back to Daniel or Ezekiel or Isaiah, we look to whatever is on the headlines that day on our Yahoo newsfeed.
You still use Yahoo, huh?
No. Well, actually, I don't. But
myself,
that's the safest.
I
that's
think
the safest news outlet to say. No one will get at Yahoo.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But I think you're emphasizing a really key point here, and that's using our Bible to help us gain understanding for this revelation, right? Because I think so many times what we do is we're recording a podcast right now. We listen to podcasts. We go on Amazon and we ordered. I'm guilty of this already. Preparing for this series, like ordering a couple books. Well, then not all that's bad, but I think we got to come back to knowing our Bible.
The Bible's the best interpreter of the Bible, always.
Absolutely.
I read a comment yesterday. Dr. Lowry wrote a commentary, Revelation's Rhapsody. I was just rereading some things on that, and he reads from or quotes G.K. Chesterton. He said, "Critics are much madder than poets, and though St. John the Evangelist saw many strange monsters in his vision, he saw no creature so wild as one of his own commentators." There's some crazy stuff out there.
Yep.
So,
and actually, I helped Dr. Lowry whenever he was writing that book. I compiled a lot of that. Where I get that Old Testament statistic is in his appendix. That appendix is I put that together for him, and him and I had a lot of conversations before he died about that G.K. Chesterton quote. And at the time, he was casting a vision for me of what I now experience. Man, the amount of emails that I get that they're usually driven by fear and anger. They're usually pretty angry at me about Revelation. It's overwhelming. So even this morning I had to respond to a Facebook message of a person that was pretty upset, and they were talking about 5G, and they were talking about the vaccine and how I've been deceived, and there's a lot of fear that goes into our interpretations of the book of Revelation, and fear plus interpretation usually becomes a terrifying interpretation. It becomes a terrifying application.
Context.
And that's why I love that in Revelation. Yep. I love that in Revelation 1:17, one of the first things we hear Jesus say in the book is, don't be afraid.
Context is a big, big deal in all understanding. And I don't think we realize how much, there is the biblical context or the text context, but there's our life context. And so I am sure today, those people that want to look at just what they catch on the news, and so when they see Israel and Hamas going at it, they're looking in Revelation trying to find that somewhere. I get so aggravated at these arguments that come out of our immediate context, basically American culture, our news, what's going on with our part of the world, and trying to broadcast that as if we're the only people that matter in the grand story of what God's doing. No inclusion of, the gospel's doing this in Latin America or Africa or Asia, but right here in the middle of America, this is what seems to be happening. So that's what God's up to. And people take that context and jump into the text, and man, that's dangerous.
So, Shane, how do you have those conversations? Because you said you responded to that message. So, understanding context, but also what Jeff just pointed out too is so many of us have a limited perspective of global Christianity and limited perspective of what Scripture says. So, how do you engage people in those conversations whenever you respond?
Gently, tenderly.
Well, there goes that.
I was hoping for a real smackdown.
We thought you had a meme that maybe you used.
One meme.
I just recycled the same meme over and over. So for example, first of all, like I share the frustration too, especially whenever we're talking about things like, when is the tribulation going to start? Well, the problem is I'm really good friends. I've taught Revelation over in Russia with one of my good friends in India. And I would teach on Revelation, and right after me, he would teach on suffering and persecution as a Christian. I mean, what they're going through in India is unbelievable. Not just right now with the COVID stuff. I'm talking like the stuff that they go through as Christians. I mean, he was showing video after video of bombs, of people being attacked with machetes, of people having their wives raped and killed in front of them because they're sharing the gospel. And it's frustrating then whenever I come back and I hear tribulation hasn't started yet, and I say, for whom? Or people are like, well, we'll be raptured before things get bad. And I say, well, then what do I say to my friends in the underground church of China? I mean, they haven't left, and it's really bad over there. However, here's also where I check so I do get frustrated with a little bit of the Western myopic way of looking at the Bible. Nevertheless, what is motivating the people that are trying to look to Revelation and connect it to what's happening in their world is the same thing that motivates me and my desire to broaden my view, and that's this. They're asking the question, does God care about me intimately? Does he see me? Does he connect with me in my world, or is he distant, away, and disconnected? It's the same thing that actually John's trying to reveal in Revelation to the churches of Revelation. He's saying, Jesus is actually walking amongst the lampstands. That to me is one of the most vivid images in Revelation chapter 1. In Revelation 1:12, John looks and sees this voice that's talking to him, and he says, I looked and I saw him walking amongst the lampstands. And then when you go down to verse 20, it gives us the definition of the lampstands. The lampstands are the churches. Like Jesus is walking among you, and many of us, we think that we have to use the headlines to crack the code to demonstrate that God is near us. But what Revelation is trying to say is that God's name, Emmanuel, means something. He is with us. A lot of the times the problem isn't his presence. The problem is our inability to see it. So whenever I'm talking to people and they are intense about their definition of the mark of the beast, or they're intense about the definition of the woman in Revelation 12 or the harlot in 17. I know what is behind their intensity. It is this desire for a child to be seen by their parent. And so in that moment, I want to connect with that part of them, as opposed to a lot of the times their objections become smoke screens. And if I get distracted by the smoke screens, their interpretations, then a lot of the times I miss the pastoral moment of connecting with them in their greatest wound. Because it's their wound that's preventing them from seeing that Jesus is present with them right now. And so, yeah, I mean, I usually allow them to guide the conversation. I allow them to, if they ask a question, I'll answer it. But a lot of the times they just want somebody to listen to them and not get angry with them. And so that's usually my approach. It's okay that we disagree. And I try to say that too at the beginning of every one of my classes. Like, we're allowed to disagree. Or I tell my students in class all the time, you can disagree with me and get an A. You just have to be able to explain to me why it is that we disagree. And even if at the end of your explanation I still disagree with you, I still love and respect you, because we're covered with the blood of Jesus, and that should matter for something. So a lot of the times I'm usually pretty patient. If they ask a question, I'll answer it. A lot of the times they don't ask a question. They just want to be heard. And I have no problem being that person present with them just to listen with them. It's fine.
Do you find a lot of those questions come from a stance people take that it's either figurative or literal? And they kind of defend that ground they've chosen?
Yes. And really where that, it's funny because we use that language now, but we don't even know where the debate came from. And if you know where the debate came from, you could even appreciate what they're fighting for. So a lot of times I'm accused of taking the book figuratively and not literally. Well, that debate comes from the early 20th century, where Rudolf Bultmann was demythologizing the text. And so everything in the text, he was stripping it away, and he was coming up with these, what they would call really figurative readings of the Bible. And you had other people that were doing this too. So some people in the historical Jesus were stripping it away in a different way. We're only going to get down to the historical facts, and we're going to discount the resurrection and discount the... That's where this language of figurative, this debate over figurative versus literal language comes from. The problem is that's not what we're talking about anymore when we talk about Revelation. A lot of times what people are saying when they say, I take it literally, is they're saying, I take what the images say seriously. That's what they're saying. Because they don't really mean the word literal. If they meant the word literal, then I would say, well, if you take something and you'd interpret it figuratively, technically that can also be the literal interpretation of a figurative passage. Like, because the word literal just comes from the Latin litera, which just means letter for letter. You actually pay attention to every letter. But what they typically will do is they'll say, well, I take it literally, but then they're forced into figurative interpretations and they don't even know it. So, for example, I've had people come at me, well, I take it literal, and I just think that the locusts in Revelation 8 and 9 are Apache helicopters.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, but that would be a figurative interpretation. Like, I don't know. And so my kind of response to the figurative literal is, actually language doesn't work that way. Language doesn't fit into the little boxes of now I am speaking figuratively, and then over here I can switch boxes and say now I'm speaking literally. It doesn't work that way. And we know it doesn't, because we understand the context of the things that we're saying. So, and I think I use this in the Right Now Media videos, although I haven't watched them in a minute, so I don't really know. But it's like me saying like, "Whoa, did you see the sunset?" No one gets all up in arms and goes, excuse me, the earth was rotating. Like nobody, we understand that sunset is an agreed upon way of talking about the end of the day. But technically, it is the earth rotating, the sun is not. Now, I know there's people that can even argue with me on that. But the whole point is language
earthers.
moves. Yeah, I know, exactly. Yeah, I actually have a book that was sent to me not too long ago that it was Earth-centric. They were arguing that the sun is not the center, the earth is the center. Anyway. But my point with that is to say we move in and out of this all the time. Matter of fact, every single word is a metaphor because it's pointing to something beyond itself, and that's what figurative means. So every letter is actually a metaphor. And when we push those letters together, it becomes a different metaphor. And when we string them in a sentence, it's a bigger metaphor. And you put them in a paragraph, it's another one. Language doesn't work in these boxes. However, instead of saying I read Revelation figuratively or literally, I say I want to read it the way that John wanted it to be read. So instead of literal or figurative, I argue we should be reading it naturally. And if John wants to say something using a symbol, we should read it naturally as a symbol. And if he wants to say something without a symbol, like whenever the angel at the end of Revelation 19 yells, "Worship God," I don't really have to get into heavy symbolic language to hear what those two words mean. And I need to allow that to naturally flow from verse to verse. How do I know then what is literal or figurative? Context. The context will tell us. So is Jesus a sword swallower? Because in Revelation chapter 1:16, he has a double-edged sword coming out of his mouth. Well, then how did he say what he's saying in verse 17? We don't ever see him take it out of his mouth. The point is, language doesn't work that way. And so we need to allow language to be what language is, even in the book of Revelation. Just read it naturally.
Mm-hmm. That's good. What are some stories, images, parts of the text that you just really like? They're just fun, graphic for you, that they grab you. You mentioned the lampstands. What are some other ones?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, this has only been something I've been wrestling with the last 6 months or so, but I think Revelation 1, verses 17 and 18 summarize the entire book. And it's been an image that I think if we grab a hold of it, and we put it forefront of our minds, we will understand what the whole Revelation is. And in verse 17 and 18, actually, let me open it up, and that way I can read it word for word. John's talking. He says in verse 17, he says, "When I saw him," meaning Jesus. So when I saw Jesus, I fell at his feet as though dead. And I love that image because it reminds, John traveled with Jesus for 3 years, and yet he encounters Jesus, and John's natural response is to bury his face into the ground. And whenever I was growing up, about 20 some odd years ago when I was in college, there was this popular shirt that was going around Christian circles that said, "Jesus is my homeboy." And it always bothered me. I was like, he's your homeboy? Like, if Jesus comes up to you, I'm not saying you can't give him a hug, but why not your first reaction be what the Apostle John's reaction was? And that's just fall down and bury your face in the dirt by his sandals. Because that ultimately, with that posture, it reminds us who Jesus is and who God is. But then I love the next part of this verse. It says, "Then he reached his right hand, or placed his right hand on me." And that's the book of Revelation. God finds us in our deadness, but then he makes the first move and reaches out and touches us. And then his first word is, "Don't be afraid. I am the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead, and now look, I'm alive forever and ever, and I hold the keys over death and Hades." In other words, he reaches out and touches us, tells us not to be afraid, and then offers us the same death and resurrection that he himself experienced. Those two verses, if you keep those in your mind, that's the message of Revelation. Now, I will say the other one that I'm sorry, go ahead. I have a ton of them, but
that's a lot right there. We're going to switch the preaching calendar. I get this text.
No, too bad. It's me. You're out. Shane's written week 1 of this message series.
When we were there, I did. We just won't show this with anybody, and we'll preach it. And they'll think we're awesome.
Let's shut this podcast down. It never happened. Yeah.
I forget where we even recorded it at because we couldn't do it on site. But I did an intro to Revelation.
We did it at the St. John's Church, right?
Was it?
We did, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And I was just reflecting. It's been like 50, 60 years since Jesus and John had been together. They'd been best friends. I just think of the emotional impact of, Jesus, the resurrected Jesus, showing up for John.
Yeah.
That's just crazy, overwhelming, emotionally. That's a great image. I'm glad I asked you that question. What's the next one?
One chapter in.
We need 13. Go ahead.
One from each chapter, and then. Oh man.
What's the next one that comes to your mind?
Actually, and this was going to seem, it just hit me in class. I just finished teaching Revelation this semester at Ozark. But man, a couple of weeks ago, I got hung up on chapter 15, verse 2, and it seems innocuous, but it just, I don't know, the way it hit me was overwhelming. It says, and I saw what looked like a sea of glass, which the sea of glass there in 15:2, the first time we saw that phrase was in chapter 4, and before the throne at around verse 5 or 6, it says, and before the throne, the sea was clear as crystal, like a sea of glass. And I saw what looked like a sea of glass, glowing with fire, and standing beside the sea, those who had been victorious over the beast and its image and over the number of its name. And the reason why that's powerful to me is because in chapter 13, from the sea, the dragon is standing next to the sea, and from the sea he calls forth this grotesque beast that wages war and that conquers Christians, kills them. As a matter of fact, even in Revelation 13:10, they're being killed so intensely. He gives them a proverb. He says, if anyone is to come and take you as a prisoner of war you go off. If anyone is to come to kill you by the sword you die. And then it says, this calls for patient endurance on the part of the saints. And in Jewish literature, the sea is a symbol of chaos and evil. It's why the four beasts in Daniel chapter 7 come out of the sea. It's why in Revelation 21:1 it says, and there is no longer any sea, because chaos and evil aren't a part of the new heavens and the new earth. But here in chapter 15, verse 2, we see those that belong to Jesus, and they are standing beside the sea. Why? Because as followers of Jesus, whenever we understand the revelation of Jesus Christ, when we've experienced that death and resurrection that Jesus promises when he reaches out and touches us, we can stand in the midst of evil and chaos and not be overwhelmed and not be overcome. And so that image of them standing there has been really challenging, really, for my own personal life over the last couple of weeks, too.
Wow. One more? That's good stuff.
Sure. Oh, man. Okay, I'll be honest. My favorite passage in the entire book of Revelation is Revelation 21, 1 through 7. And the reason why is because I think it's one of these cool moments where we get to see God giddy. I remember there's only a couple times in my life whenever I've seen or talked to my dad, and my dad got giddy over something. Now, I see with my kids all the time. Whenever my kids come home, I have an 8-year-old, I have a 17 down to 8-year-old. And my 8-year-old comes home and he's telling me about the playground, and usually whatever he repeats 27 times, I know it's what he's most excited about. So he's like, Dad, on the playground, there's the slide, and the slide was amazing. I went down the slide, then I went back up the slide, and I'm like, so you liked the slide? That's kind of your point. But God kind of does that in Revelation 21. So verse 1, then I saw a new heavens and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea, no more evil or chaos. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. Now listen to God, verse 3. It says, and I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them, and he will be their God. I'm like, okay, so you're kind of excited that we're hanging out together. like God gets giddy over the fact that his dwelling place and our dwelling place become one. And that's something I try to talk to wherever I preach or wherever I teach. I try to remind people, you do know that God's not looking for a loophole to kick you into hell, right? His goal isn't for you to be damned. His goal is for you to be with him. But a lot of the times, even as Christians, we spend most of our time questioning, am I saved? Am I not saved? I was a youth minister for about 4 years, and finally one night I just told my students, I said, hey, you're saved. Now get out there and start doing stuff for the kingdom. Quit asking that question. He is not looking for a way to kick you out. He's breaking down every boundary and barrier to bring you in, and he is giddy about it.
Wow.
And I love that in 21. We get to see that heart of our Father.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think Garden of Eden when I read that text.
Yeah.
walking with him.
And
in
so
the middle of the day.
did John, because that's Revelation 22. We end up in the Garden of Eden. So
I believe that leads us to maybe our next question, because that's one of your books, right?
yeah,
mean, essentially.
that is. Yep. That,
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Between Two
Yeah,
Trees.
I just
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I just put out a book like the last year or so called Between Two Trees, and it's based off of that insight that the Bible ends in the same way that it begins, in the garden, looking at the tree of life. And the whole book's premise is based off of this next statement where I say, but here's the problem. We live life between these two trees, and between these two trees, life's kind of hard. And so the book just explores really. I actually, in the introduction, I talk about this. I say, I sat down to write a book on how to read the book of Revelation, and about 80% of the way through, I realized I was writing a book on how the book of Revelation reads us. So it's about how Revelation, really the Word of God, unearths what is broken in this world between two trees. And so I talk pretty candidly about my own story, being a sexual abuse victim, and how the cross and the resurrection have brought healing to me, but also wrestling with what is the problem that we're dealing with. I think a lot of times we think sin is just breaking a rule, but in reality, sin is much worse than that. We actually, and the language I use in the book is, we become one flesh with death. Whenever we sin, we unite, we have a union with death, so much so that we actually look to death as our Savior. And that comes from Revelation chapter 9. So in Revelation chapter 9, verse 6, this is after hell has been opened at the end of 8, and all of a sudden all these locusts are coming out, and hell is opened, and yet hell is torturing those that belong to hell. And part of Revelation is saying that's the character of evil. Don't you understand? Evil will devour its own. But in verse 6 of chapter 9, it says this. It says, during those days, people will seek death, but they will not find it. They will long to die, but death will elude them. And I usually put a capital D there, because if you think of death as a person, you start to understand how that makes sense. We've been united with death. We've become one flesh with death, so much so that whenever we're in our deepest moments, we reach out to death to rescue us. But death will only give us what death can give us, and that's abandonment. Because death is not like life, a father. A father that pursues us is very different than death that eludes us when we need it most. And so the whole book just explores that throughout really the entire gospel narrative, but culminating in the fact that we will eventually end back in a garden. But Jesus hung between two trees, and so are we. Right now we're suspended between these two gardens.
I'm having a hard time thinking of questions because I'm getting so caught up in the understanding of what you're sharing. It's rich.
I feel like my brain's about to
I
explode.
know, right?
I love it.
There's a lot of pieces.
I
even
thought I was
connecting this
prepared to
morning.
teach this, and now I'm, whoa.
We were in a teaching team meeting a few weeks ago, and I was like, feel so inadequate to even begin this. But I think
You are.
Well, I know it's absolutely true. But I think
We are.
you keep going back to this is Jesus, right? This is about what he has done for us.
This
and
is Jesus, the revelation of Jesus,
Absolutely.
and how we worship him.
Yep.
Yep.
So the 7 cities, chapters 2 and 3, we're going to spend a week on each.
Oh, that's awesome.
How does that set us up for understanding the whole book? I mean, we went to these locations like you did. We saw the corroded pipes in Laodicea. All those things you've referenced and more. How did the context of those cities, how does that shape? What should we do with those to help us understand the whole book?
Yeah, that's a great question. Matter of fact, I have one of those pipes from Laodicea. One of the
You
pipes
stole
where the
one.
water
I
was
was gonna
gone,
say,
so I have
did
it here.
you steal it?
Because we thought about it.
Now,
You what? You have a pipe from there?
It's-
We got in
no.
trouble for taking a video there.
We'll put your
I
email
stood
in
by
the
the
lower.
pipes and got
Did you
yelled
really?
at. So
Yeah, we got yelled at for being near the pipes.
Yeah.
Whoa,
They're on pallets,
Interesting.
laying on the ground.
he had a
Okay.
pipe permit.
Oh,
Yeah.
He had a pipe.
Well, yeah, a pipe permit. No, actually, it was our what is it? Tour guide. She came up to me, and I was taking pictures, and she goes, the rule is that if it hasn't been excavated, then it's fair game. And I said, define for me fair game. She goes, if there's no like regulations on the land, then anything sticking out of the ground is just a rock. I said, seriously? And she says, yeah. So I said, so for instance, I walked over to this piece of the pipe and I was like, what about this? And she's just like, it's just a rock until the site's been excavated. So I've got one of those, and I have a piece of marble from the city of Laodicea here too.
Where at in the city?
Anyway,
what area? Do you remember?
in the Laodicea,
Yeah.
where I got those, it was the pictures that I have from around 2007. You could see arches from the place, but they were barely sticking out of the ground. It was this
No
open
way.
field.
Wow.
That's all excavated.
Yeah, and
now.
it had not been touched yet. Okay, see, because when I was standing there, I could see Hierapolis, and I could look over and in the distance see Colossae, but I was in this open field that was unexcavated.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So anyway,
I
that
got
was
this
fun.
gold statue
Oh,
when
okay.
I was there. But
Stole it from a
Wait a
shop.
minute, what?
never mind. Let's go on.
That's awesome. Is that what I saw on eBay this morning? What's going on? Okay,
No, that was just the NFT of it.
no, chapters 2 and 3. Here is the overarching message of chapters 2 and 3. Jesus knows us intimately. That is what I love about every one of the churches, is that it is intimately interwoven with key aspects of their city. So I mentioned with Sardis, where 3 times in their history, their impenetrable citadel was overrun by Cyrus the Persian, by Alexander the Great. But it was because someone fell asleep whenever they were supposed to be watching guard. And that's why Jesus yells to the church in chapter 3 to Sardis, wake up. Like it's this interesting interaction with what's happening in their city and what's happening in them spiritually. So, for example, Church of Ephesus. In the Church of Ephesus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world was the Temple of Artemis. You guys probably saw maybe a column because it's gone.
Yeah.
Now, but what's fascinating was inside of that Temple of Artemis was a tree. It was an olive tree that was believed that Artemis was birthed into the world through that tree. And you could, if you were some sort of criminal, you could run up and you could grab a hold of the tree and claim asylum. And in a sense, the tree then was like a tree of life for you. It gave you an opportunity to defend yourself. And Jesus, at the end of chapter 2 and verse 7, to the end of at the city of Ephesus, he talks about giving them, the one that overcomes, I will give you the right to eat of the true tree of life. Like, so he's taking images and aspects of their city and he's weaving it into the message to say this: I know you, I see you. And if you're doing good things, that's a super exciting and encouraging thing. Because there's times, and Mother Teresa even experienced this, there's times where you are deep into your ministry, and yet at times you don't even know if God sees all the things that you're sacrificing for the kingdom. And whenever Jesus comes and he writes this letter to you and he says, I see you, if you're doing good things, that is so incredibly encouraging. But if you see in red letters, I see you, and you're being disobedient, that's the most terrifying thing that you can experience. And so, to these churches, he's saying, spiritually, I see you. I walk amongst your city. I walk amongst the lampstands. But to each of the 7 churches, he has something very specific to say to them. And a lot of the times, we overlook the impact of what they would have experienced sitting in the pews and hearing these words come out. So for the Church of Ephesus, which I actually believe that the Church of Ephesus probably applies to the church in America most clearly today. It's the message we need to hear. Because the Church of Ephesus, this is the basic gist of it. I see you. I know your deeds. And man, when it comes to truth, you guys are stinking awesome. I mean, my goodness, whenever there's these false apostles that come in, you root them out. You, the Nicolaitans, I don't like them either. When it comes to truth, Ephesus, you guys are incredible. But here's my problem with you. You have lost all semblance of love. And you keep sacrificing people on your altar of truth. I preached a message from this a couple years ago, and this was my dominant thought was, if you speak God's truth, but you speak it without God's love, it ceases to be God's truth. That the form of what you're saying matters. And a lot of the times we are communicating things as Christians that are true in the public sphere, but we are not doing it towards the culture in the community that doesn't know Jesus. We are not doing it with God's love. And Paul in 1 Corinthians 13 says, if you can fathom all mysteries, but do not have love, if you understand all prophecy, but do not have love, then you're as worthless as a resounding gong, a clanging cymbal. And to the church of Ephesus, man, good job being truth, but you're not allowed to sacrifice people on the altar of truth. So I preached a different sermon on how to speak against culture, and my dominant thought was based off of this text. But it was this: you are allowed to speak against the culture that you are willing to be crucified for. That's what Jesus is saying to the church of Ephesus. Like, whenever I found you in your place of brokenness, did I come at you with a whip, or did I come at you with things to heal your wounds? But you're going after everybody in your culture like that you can just kill them with the sword of truth. And then Jesus says this, and this is how intense he gets with Ephesus. He says, I am this close to removing your lampstand. Because you can get all of the questions right, but if you say it the wrong way, you're wrong. So for me, each of the messages of the churches of Revelation, they're that potent. But they're potent because he knows their cities intimately, and he knows them spiritually with an intimacy that is terrifying for those that are disobedient, but deeply encouraging for those that have been faithful and sacrificed for the kingdom.
Wow.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you have time this morning to go through each story?
Where
Oh, no, wait. I tell you what. If you don't, let me pick up the ones I'm teaching.
How about this? Where are some resources?
Yeah, where can we
that
find
could,
you?
Yeah, point us towards to help us all grow in our understanding of this.
Yes. Now, please don't hear this as vain, because that is not my goal. Like, this is genuinely something I try to give. I do have a website. If you Google my name, Shane Wood, it's shanejwood.com. Now, here's, like, that might sound vain, but I actually give away all of my lectures that I do at Ozark totally for free. You don't even have to sign up for anything. I have.
Yeah.
You can just
See,
go there. You can
the
listen
free
to my
kind of removes the
lectures.
vanity of it. That's good.
I mean, it's one of the. Here's actually the reason why I do the website. My first full-time ministry, I was an associate pastor of a church of about 65 in High Hill, Missouri. That's where I was. My first full-time ministry was, and I would go to all
if I have
these
it right,
different.
you were doing your master's and your doctorate
Yep.
at the same time, basically, like back to back.
Well, yes, I did them back to back.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
But that was the season you were in.
and I was doing my.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
But whenever I was there, I would go to these conferences and I'd get super excited about the resources, but then we didn't have the budget to buy any.
Mm-hmm.
And so I made it a vow that if I ever got into a position where I was, able to provide resources, that I would do it 99% of them totally free. And so the whole website is all my lectures here at Ozark. And then whenever I go preach, I try to put those up there too. But I have a whole class on Revelation there. And it spends an hour. I think I spend like maybe 2 to 3 hours on chapters 2 and 3. So that's a good place to start. And then there are other like books and stuff that, depending upon the level of the person and the level of depth they want to go into, you can email me through the website, and I can even tailor make what books I would suggest to you based on what you're wanting to study in the Book of Revelation. So.
Now
I don't know
you're
if that's
putting
helped,
together,
but
or
hopefully
you're
that-
finished up some curriculum here recently that's going to come out. Where would we
Yes,
go
yeah.
with that?
Yeah, if you go to actually my Facebook page, it's just Shane J. Wood. I have a video on there that explains about a class that I put together on the Book of Revelation through a place called the Garden City Project. And it's a 10-week study that I do periodically. Like, we're going to be starting one for the summer here in the next couple of weeks. I set up Facebook discussion forums where the people that are taking it all over the world, like I've had people from India take it, and the United Kingdom, But then you can discuss all the different lessons that we go through on the Facebook page, and you get some extra curriculum assignments, all kinds of fun stuff.
So it's actually a class people could take with you.
Yep.
Oh wow.
Yes, it's a 10-week class, and it comes with a syllabus, and it's not for a grade. It's for personal transformation. But if you put yourself into it, it's some of the stuff I'm getting through there. I'm like, man, I wish some of my Ozark students here at the college would be putting out stuff like this. So it's been really rewarding.
That's cool.
That's real cool. And of course, we've got the Right Now Media. You've got 10 week. Is it 10 week? 10 sessions? I don't remember.
10 or 11. I can't remember how many I did, but yeah, something like that.
And we're encouraging our life group leaders and stuff here to make sure you view that, because we don't want to go down the crazy path, but we want to help people see and worship Jesus better. So it's good stuff.
Absolutely, and this is the book to do it.
I don't know, on behalf of these guys, I don't know. I just want to say thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time, not just today while you're sharing with us, but thanks for your time investing yourself in learning this, so that you can impact others. I know there's been hours and hours of study, a life of study, and it's obvious, and we're thankful for that. We appreciate your time and sharing with us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, it's really been my pleasure. I appreciate you guys asking me to come on.
We appreciate your prayers and thoughts as we endeavor to share Revelation all summer here. We're excited about it. It's going to be good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for joining us on the ReThink podcast. Thank you, Shane, for joining us. If you want connection to those resources, we'll make sure to provide a link for everybody to follow up and connect with the stuff that Shane's mentioned here. And again, thank you to him for his time this morning.